Do you feel stuck in life? Have you convinced yourself that you can't do anything else? You might think a colonel with 27 years in the Marine Corps would convince himself that the only thing he could do is military work. Instead, he took the tools from his military career and applied them to his reinvention in retirement.
I think if you are talking about reinventing yourself, don't forget to look at what's already in your tool chest, because you don't need to go find new tools. You may have some tools in your tool chest that you just need to break out and use.
That's up next on Reinvention at Any Age. How did you end up in this kind of situation? And that changed the whole trajectory of your life. This is my light, and I'm going to let it shine. Even if it's uncomfortable, if the change is for the better, it's worth it. Don't be scared. Prepare. Reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Reinvention at Any Age. I'm your host, Amy Sweezy, and I am passionate about helping you navigate through your reinvention. Whether you want to do it or you have to do it, the question we all ask is, how do I do it? How do I reinvent myself, whether I'm 20 or 40 or 60? My guest today spent 27 years in the United States Marine Corps. He flew 39 combat missions during Operation Desert Storm and deployed twice to the Western Pacific. He was the lead government pilot for the X-35 test team and was the only U.S. government pilot to fly all three variants of the X-35. He's flown more than 3,200 hours in more than 40 different types of aircraft and is the only pilot to have flown both the X-35 and the F-35. Retired Colonel Art Tomassetti also worked for Lockheed Martin Aeronautics and is currently the CEO of Time to Climb. Please welcome to the podcast, Art Turbo Tomassetti. Art, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, I am a little biased, I have to admit, about today's interview because I am a brand new Marine mom. My son just finished boot camp at Parris Island.
Outstanding.
So thank you. I'm going to pick your brain a lot after we're done with this call.
You got it. Absolutely.
You've had such an impressive career. I'm a little bit of I'm not really a military brat. My dad was in the Marine Corps and served in Vietnam, but was already out by the time I was born. My sister was an officer in the Marine Corps and had two tours in Iraq. So when I read about your career, I understand just, the sacrifices that you have made. Your plane, your flight suit are found in the Smithsonian. And just reading your bio at the beginning of this podcast gives me chills. So let me start by just saying thank you so much for your service and your huge contribution to our country.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to serve.
Well, before we delve too far into your story, for those that are not familiar with military lingo or traditions, there's so many of them, maybe they've seen Top Gun Maverick, but we all know that pilots have nicknames, right, or call signs. So how did you get the name Turbo?
Oh, see, everyone has an origin story for their call sign, but not everybody shares that origin story.
Oh, okay.
So let's just leave it at, there is a county in the state of Illinois where I promised the local government officials I would never operate a motor vehicle, and we'll just leave it at that.
All right, I will just stop asking questions. Now, the little bit that I know about the Marine Corps is that you really don't have a lot of personal choice or freedom, right? Most of what you do it's for the good of the Corps or the good of the country, and it's really dictated by your superiors. No matter your rank, there's somebody bossing you around. So to the non-military person, can you just explain a little bit about the structure of the Marines and the idea that you really don't control your own schedule and why that's even a necessity?
Yeah, so I think it's probably true for any of the military services, but maybe more so for the Marine Corps. If you look at the commercials that are out there today, it says that you don't join the Marine Corps, you become a Marine. So there is this process that everyone goes through, regardless of what you may end up doing professionally or in your career in the Marine Corps. You're all going to start out as that basic infantryman, basic rifle carrying Marine. Everybody starts there. So everybody has that sort of common ground, that common starting place before they head off on whatever their specialty may be after that. The regiment of being in the military where your day is very, very scripted, especially in the beginning as you're just becoming or just entering. Your day is very scripted. And it's that way for a reason. They want you to get into this mode of having that discipline, having that structure, and being able to operate in that kind of environment day in and day out. We train in peacetime for what we hope that we never have to actually do in wartime. But the fact that you are training in that very deliberate, that very regimented, that very disciplined thing is going to pay dividends if you ever have to get into those sort of crisis situations that we hope to avoid. And it shapes your life. I still wake up at the same time every morning that I was doing in the Marine Corps. I still have this almost the same physical fitness regimen that I have when I was in the Marine Corps. The brainwashing is tremendously effective and it stays with you forever.
Well, at 27 years, I mean, it feels like a lifetime, but I know you still have a whole lifetime to go. So
Oh,
why was
absolutely.
it after that 27 years that you decided, okay, it's my time. It's time to retire?
I think for me specifically, I could see the writing on the wall that I was not going to advance to the next rank. When I made the decision to go down the test pilot track, I understood at that time that it was probably going to limit me to making it to colonel, and very, very rare opportunity for people who go down that path to make it to the general officer rank. It does happen, but it's not very common. The reason I stayed in for the 27 years, there were a lot of opportunities to get out before that. A lot of my contemporaries, when I was at the 10-year mark, were getting out and going to fly for the airlines. That was sort of that opportune jump off point for folks who wanted to go into that particular career field. I stayed in because the Marine Corps kept letting me do worthwhile things. I got to do really cool things in airplanes. You talked about a few of those in the opening. And probably more important than that, I had my opportunities as I became more senior to lead people. And I never really thought as a youngster, just becoming a Marine, that that was going to be a big deal, that that was going to matter. They told you that, yes, you aspire to be a leader. That's what we're grooming you for. That's what we're preparing you for. But to me, it was like, hey, I want to fly airplanes. This is fun. This is exciting. This is what I want to do. But when I had those leadership opportunities, I realized just how important that was. When you are put in command of people, which is what the terminology we use in the military, a little bit different than just being in charge of or the manager of, that happens in the civilian world. You are responsible to those people and you're responsible for those people. And that's a pretty significant thing.
So, what was it like going from decades of structure and meaning and leadership to now really kind of just being in control of your own schedule and having this whole life of, okay, what's next?
Yeah, so the transition from military to civilian for me was actually probably a little easier than for most people. I got to still be turbo. I was turbo for 27 years in the military. And when I went to work at Lockheed Martin, they knew me as turbo because I had worked with them before. So I didn't really have to reinvent myself necessarily at that juncture, except I had to reinvent my approach to clothing and wardrobe. For 27 years in the military, I knew exactly what I was supposed to wear every day. And there weren't a lot of choices. There were like 5 things that you could wear. And you were told each day which one to wear. When I got out and started working for Lockheed, I realized that they probably didn't want to see me show up in my green pants and my khaki shirt every day. So I was going to have to rethink having a wardrobe and what that meant.
But that Marine Corps dress blue uniform is impressive. So I'm sure they would have
Yes.
been fine with you wearing that.
Yeah, they probably would have been okay with me wearing that every day, but they wanted Art Tomassetti Turbo, the test pilot who was experienced with the X-35 and the F-35. That's who they hired. So I got to continue to be that same person. But then when I retired from Lockheed, and all of a sudden, after going all the way back to my first job working at Winn-Dixie in high school when I turned 16, I had a schedule every day, whether it was school, whether it was work, whether it was the Marine Corps, whether it was Lockheed. I knew where I had to be at a certain time in the morning. I knew I was going to be there for a certain amount of time during the day, go home, and then lather, rinse, repeat, and do it all over again the next day. And then I retired from Lockheed, and all of a sudden, what I'm going to do tomorrow is all up to me. And wow, that is just liberating. It's daunting because if you're not really thinking about it, if you're not prepared for it, it can be overwhelming because you find yourself going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I had a plan going into it, and we'll talk about it at the end. I put together a couple of videos on my YouTube channel that's, how to do retired. And I have a daily plan. So each day I do 1 hour of physical fitness. I do 1 hour of something intellectual, whether that's an online class or learning something new or whatever it may be. I do 1 hour of chores because you got to do those. And then I do 1 hour of creative where I sort of let the left side of my brain have its time to do its thing. And I think part of that came from my Marine Corps experience of knowing that structure was important. So I was like, okay, I know that structure is important. I saw what it did for me in those first 3 decades of my career. Well, why not bring a little bit of that structure into retired life?
I highlighted several of your military accomplishments earlier in the intro, and I'm sure there's so many more that I didn't mention. But what would you point to as you look back on some of the events that shaped who you are now and that you can do what you're doing in retirement?
Yeah, so I think, there's a couple of things that are probably highlights that I can look back and say, yeah, having that experience maybe changed me a little bit. The first was making it through pilot training. It wasn't a given. Not everybody makes it through. And it was something that I had, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a test pilot and an astronaut someday. And I didn't really have any other plan. So the first time I applied to test pilot school and I got my rejection letter, I
Mm.
was kind of like, oh my gosh, now what? Well, I can wait 6 months and apply again. So I did that. And again, and again, and again. And I got accepted to test pilot school on my 7th try. My life would have been completely different, and I probably wouldn't be talking to you today if I had just given up at any of those previous things. But being committed and being focused on your dream, your goal, the thing you want to do, the who you want to be, was important enough for me to keep trying. So I think, becoming a pilot was sort of step one. The experience in Desert Storm, having to go do those things that we trained for. I mentioned that when we are training, we're trying to be as realistic as we can. And in the military and in the Marine Corps, some of that training, you go and you use live weapons and you try to be as realistic. But in those cases, nobody's shooting at you in those training environments.
Right.
In Desert Storm, that was all different. People were actually shooting back. And getting into the plane each day, and especially as we got into it and we lost a pilot, we had another that was shot down but made it back to us. And we were seeing that happen on occasion to our sister squadrons who were near us. It takes a little bit of soul searching to be able to really convince yourself that you are good enough, that you have trained hard enough, and that you are doing what you're supposed to do to get in a plane when that kind of stuff is going on. And then I think, as I talked about before, I think my command experiences, they are the thing that made me overall, I hope anyway, a better person. They definitely made me a better leader. It wasn't easy. I didn't start out as a good leader. I tried to be the best leader I could through it all, but I was kind of learning as I went. I made mistakes. I learned from those mistakes. I am fortunate that I had senior mentors, that I had peer mentors, and that I had junior mentors, folks that would come up to me. And I think maybe I tried to create an environment where it was okay to approach me to say, hey, boss, can I talk to you for a minute? And I appreciated that. And I think those kinds of things really helped. And because I had those opportunities and I saw how important it was to have that mentorship, I tried to do that for whoever I could later on. And I still try to do that today. I still have folks that I have been associated with in the military who call and they say, "Hey, I'm getting ready to retire. Can I bend your ear and talk to you a little bit about how you did the transition?"
And when I first asked you to be a guest on this podcast, Reinvention at Any Age, you said, you felt like your life wasn't really about reinvention as much as it was more of an evolution. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I was kind of freaking out after our first exchange because, like, oh my gosh, when I saw the title, I was, I don't see what's happened to me as reinvention. I've always seen it as sort of evolving to become the best version of me. But I sat there and I thought about it some more and I realized, yeah, there have been a couple of instances where I think reinvention might be the right word. Evolution is sort of, hey, I'm here and I'm going to take a next step and be a little bit better, a little bit more than I was before. Reinvention is a slightly different change or course correction, right? A little bit of altering from what you were. And as I thought about it, a really big one of those happened for me in high school. I was a shy, introverted, skinny, not really athletic kid going into high school. And I probably would have stayed that way if it wasn't for an experienced freshman year when I had some upperclassmen ask me to come and sit in the back of the room with them on day one in geometry class. Um, Terrifying, right? I was there in the front of the room with my books, sitting as close to the teacher as I possibly could because I was the only freshman in the class. And they asked me to come sit in the back, and I'm like, boy, this could go really horrible. But I did it. I said, okay, picked up my books and went and sat back there. One of those individuals was the captain of the basketball team. One of those individuals was the captain of the football team. They kind of took me under their wing. They appreciated the fact that I really understood geometry and I could help them with that.
I was trying to
And
figure
they,
out what the what the
yeah,
why was behind that.
and they were willing to help me out. The football captain lived in my neighborhood. He had me come over to his house 3 days a week. We worked out with weights. I put on 25 pounds over the course of that summer, started playing football, ran track, pole vaulted, and probably more important than all of those things, I gained a confidence in myself that I didn't have before. And that confidence is the engine that propelled me, I think, for the rest of my career path.
Do you
Um,
think those guys know now the impact they have? Are you in touch with them? Do you ever
I've tried via social media to find them, and I cannot. I've tried through this. They haven't stayed connected to the high school we went to. So, but I haven't given up. Every year I go back in and try through social media again to see if I can find them. I will someday be able to get to them and thank them for what they did. I don't think they have any idea that that's what happened.
But
Um,
isn't that such a great lesson? I mean, not just for high school kids, but for anybody, the difference that they made just by befriending you. Such a small thing. Hey, come sit with me. Hey, help me with my geometry. And that changed the whole trajectory of your life.
Absolutely. So, to your point about reinventing yourself at any age, there's a lot you have to do if you want to reinvent yourself, but you can be helped by others as well. And you can help others reinvent themselves if they want to do that. So, yeah, the power we each have to affect the people around us is tremendous. You just got to know how to use it.
Wow, fantastic. I love that. I know you have a successful podcast of your own about aviation and you have a speaking and consulting business. How long did it take you to transform or evolve from one career into the other?
Well, I think the speaking piece was always there. I've read that people who are, and I forget the letters on the Myers-Briggs, but if you're on that I side, on the introverted side, for
That's me
whatever
too.
weird reason, they tend to be the people who are better performers in front of large audiences. I can't make sense of that. I don't understand how that works. All I know is for me, it happens to be true. You put me on a stage in front of a crowd and I am in my element. Put me in a small group and it's not nearly as comfortable for me. So I think that being on stage, being able to go out and talk to audiences and groups is a very comfortable thing, and it's something where I get rewarded for doing it because I hope that I am bringing something to them that's relevant, that I'm bringing a message that they can resonate with, that I am helping them become better versions of themselves through what I can convey and maybe through sharing some of my experiences. The podcast was a little daunting. I've listened to podcasts, but I had no idea the mechanics of putting a podcast together. And it took a little bit of trial and error to get it right. And but now it's very comfortable. It used to take me a whole week to put the podcast together. Now I can do them in about a day. It's fortunate that I have a really good network of people that I can call on to be on the podcast for interviews that are willing to share their aviation stories and experience. And it's really all, again, the focus of that podcast is to talk about aviation safety and how we can all be better and how we can hopefully make the profession of aviation safer and better. So again, it kind of goes back to my deal of trying to talk to audiences and help them become better versions of themselves. I know that people can change the world. I don't know that I'm one of those people that can change the world, but I am one of those people that might be able to change other people. And if I can make other people better and they can make the world better, then it's a win-win.
Awesome. You mentioned your plan and, the 4 things that you had with your structure and, your schedule. Can you share some of the other steps, or were there other steps besides that you took in order to make that transition happen, to go from the schedule, the job, to now I'm my own boss?
So I think that having the structure was important, but then the realities of transitioning from working every day to not working every day. I mean, yes, I go out and I do the speaking consulting, but that's, I travel once a month, kind of typically for that stuff. The understanding how that is going to impact you from your day-to-day routine, how that it's going to impact you financially, and that's a huge piece for probably anybody who's making that transition, going from a career and working every day to being retired, and even knowing when to make that transition, right? Is, hey, how have I solved the financial piece of that, so you don't have the stress and worry of that, because you don't want that. I wanted the point where I decided to retire to become the point where I now not only controlled my own schedule, but I'm going to go have fun. I want to go see the world. We're going to go. My wife's going to retire after this year. This is her last year of working. And then our plan is we're going to travel. We're going to see the world. And I think that the other piece that's important is you can't just become stagnant. I mentioned my 4 hours, right? And 2 of those things that are in there was the intellectual pieces and taking an online class and trying to continue to learn new things is very, very important. If you look at any of these studies that talk about how people live to be these really grand old ages, they will all say that you've got to keep your mind active. You got to stay active, right? So continuing to learn new things, because if you think you have everything figured out, I, there's a lot more, right? Uh,
Exactly.
you know, pick up the, I don't know if people have encyclopedias anymore, but whatever, pick up the next book about stuff and start at letter A and start working your way through. So I think that's another piece that's important, is continuing to learn, continuing to find ways. I have noticed as I've aged that the things I used to do for physical fitness, some of those hurt more now when I've done them, right? So I've had to sort of adjust what those things are. I've introduced yoga, which if you had told me when I was 20 years old, hey, how would you like to do yoga? I would have laughed and walked away. Now yoga is great because yoga helps me be able to bend over and get stuff out of the back seat of the car. It helps me not hurt so much when I'm doing other things. It's improved my balance amazingly, and I never would have expected that piece of it. I still like to rollerblade because I consider that a reasonably safe thing for a somewhat senior person to do.
I think a lot of times people don't take the risk to reinvent themselves or change themselves because not only maybe they're not learning new things, but they also don't understand that some of the things they've already learned, the lessons they've learned, the skills they've acquired can actually be applied to other areas in life. And I know that
Absolutely.
you took all of those lessons that you learned as a fighter pilot in the cockpit and you apply them to other areas of life. And once you figure out the keys to success, you can kind of apply them to any pursuit, right?
Absolutely. And this is something your son will learn after being in the Marine Corps for a time, and he may not appreciate it till he gets out. And because I don't think I really appreciated it till I got out. I knew I was acquiring skills in the Marine Corps. Obviously, I learned how to fly airplanes. I learned some leadership skills, but I don't think I really ever appreciated what that really meant compared to the population at large. And I realized that there were some different leadership skills I needed to apply. I was fortunate in my military career. I did have opportunities to work with civilians in several of my organizations. I had exposure to um, both salaried workforces and compensated and represented workforces. So I sort of understood some of that. So it may have given me a little bit of a leg up. But I had to adopt a different set of skills and realize that in order to get people to do what I needed them to do, I had to, I had to educate them, and other people have heard this before because I've talked about it. It's EIEIO. I had to educate people, instill in them a sense of purpose, enable them to be successful, inspire them to get the job done, and then as the leader, provide some overwatch and make sure that, hey, if they run into a brick wall, I'm there to knock that brick wall down. So I had to start to learn a little bit of different leadership skills. But I think that is something that a lot of people don't realize is whatever your career was, right? And especially somebody coming from the military, you are gaining a whole bunch of skills that are usually valuable into whatever it is you want to go apply them to. And it's not something that everybody else is acquiring. They don't have the opportunities a lot of times out in the real world to gain those skills, those interpersonal skills, those people skills, those leadership skills. So again, yeah, I think if you are talking about reinventing yourself, don't forget to look at what's already in your tool chest, right? Because you don't need to go find new tools. You may have some tools in your tool chest that you just need to break out and use.
Fantastic. So, what advice do you have for someone who's looking to retire? I mean, I know some people just want to play golf and putter around the house, right? But not everybody. Some people want to take that opportunity to kind of reinvent their life upon retirement. So, any advice?
Yeah, I think that now I will tell you, if I could play golf, I might have done that, but I've tried, I took lessons. It just, for whatever reason, doesn't work for me.
Not your thing.
Yeah. I think that if, if you are going to try to make that transition, right, to make that step into retirement, um, you want to have some basic confidence, right? You want to be able to say, "Hey, I have something I want to do," and I think it's important to have something you want to do, right? And I think you need to have, the things that fuel the engine of transforming yourself are things like confidence. And I talk to people about the 4 C's: confidence, cleverness, courage, and commitment. Right? If you can have those 4 attributes and you are willing to apply those, and you decide that you want to do something that is significant, impactful, that makes a difference, then it's easy. Then it's easy. You have those tools that you need to do that, and you just step off and go make the world a better place.
All right. Art Turbo Tomassetti, thank you so much for being here and being a guest on today's podcast. I know that your story of reinvention or evolution will inspire so many others. So, how do people find you, find your podcast?
Yeah. So first, if you just type my name into Google, you'll find links to a lot of the stuff. I have a YouTube channel that you can find via my name. Uh, I would highly encourage, if you are making that transition to retirement, to go look at the video series I did on how to be retired. Hopefully that will be helpful. My website is www.time2climb.com. And the podcast, if you just type in Flight Test Safety Channel to whatever podcast tool you use, you'll find that. And those come out once a month.
All right. Will we find EIEIO on there?
In my YouTube channel, you will find that. That was one of my very first TED Talks I ever did, was on that. So that one's out there.
Awesome. I'm going to go find it because I need to take some more particular notes on that one. It's a good one. All right. Art Tomassetti, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Amy, for having me.
So, what about you? Were you inspired by Art's story? I especially appreciated when he shared about not getting into test pilot school time after time, but he never gave up and he kept going until he finally got in. Failure is a part of life, right? It's not about how many times we fall down or get knocked down. It's about how many times we get back up and start again. Don't waste your time focusing on what didn't work out or what could have been or what you could have done. Focus instead on what you can do now, today. Every morning we get a do-over, a chance to reinvent ourselves and make a new plan. Maybe it's a small step taken each day, or maybe it's a giant leap into the unknown. If there's a change that you want to make, you can't just sit around and wait for change to happen on its own. And the more changes you make, the more leaps you take, the more your confidence grows. So whether you want to reinvent yourself or you have to reinvent yourself, remember, reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today.